So welcome to our attendees. As you join, we'll just keep this open for a few minutes so that you all have a chance to join in. There were a very large number of registrants for this, so we don't know how many will be joining us immediately, but we want to give you a few minutes to filter in, and then we will get started. Also, as you're filtering in, while we have some time, please do, if you wish, introduce yourselves in the chat. We love to know who's joining us. We love to know where you're from. And yeah, just drop a little message in the chat. That's the one with the single speech bubble, and just say hello and where you're from, what institution, maybe whether you're a librarian or researcher, and also why you're particularly interested in this workshop, so that, it's useful knowledge for us and our speakers to help us craft the questions and make sure we really answer what it is you need to know. Okay, so I'm just going to give it another minute or two. Sorry, some of you who are just coming in, I'll say the same thing again for those of you who's been here for a few minutes. Apologies for repeating myself. You will notice, all of you, that as this is a webinar, you are on mute and your videos are off, but there will be a Q&A session at the end of the event, so you will have an option to ask questions of our panelists towards the end of the event. So do keep an eye on that. But in the meantime, if you have any, if you want to introduce yourself, please do put it in the chat. But also, if you want to comment on the discussion, put it in the chat. Obviously, don't put a question in there because it'll get lost. But if you do want to comment on the discussion or respond, do feel free to use the chat as a communal forum for exchanging ideas and commentary. I think we can probably get started now because we've got a few minutes of me waffling before we get to the important part of the event. So Joy, if you could skip to the next slide, please. So first of all, we just have a few housekeeping things. Most of you will be very familiar with Zoom, but just in case you're not, a brief refresher. You are able to move the Zoom window with the little arrow. If I or anyone else is talking too fast or you have a problem, please do put your hand up using the little hand icon. As I said, use the chat, which is the single speech bubble, for introducing yourself, to flag technical issues, or to comment on what the speakers are saying. In particular, we have two members of our team are monitoring the chat to cover technical issues. So don't worry, we will keep track and notice if you have a problem. And finally, if you have questions, there'll be a Q&A session at the end of this event. So if you have any questions throughout the discussion, if any of the speakers say anything that makes you have a question or think about something, please do add that into the Q&A with the double speech bubbles. Also, just so you know, we will be translating this, we'll be recording it and then translating it, and that'll be uploaded on our website, and it'll be available in English and Arabic within the week for anyone who either wants to have a recap, because we'll probably cover an awful lot of hugely important and juicy details that you might not be able to remember all of, but also if you want to share it with colleagues and your wider network, that will be available. On to the next slide, please, Joy. So for those of you who don't know us, just a brief introduction of what the Forum for Open Research in MENA is, also known as FORM. We are a non-profit membership organisation supporting the advancement, so namely the development and implementation of open science policies and practices in research communities and research institutions across the Arab states. We have four major goals and objectives within that, which is to support the advancement of those research ecosystems with regards to open access and open science in general, to create localized resources, providing that foundational knowledge for the community, to encourage cross-regional collaborations and partnerships of all the different open science advocates and advocate groups, and finally to champion the development and implementation of right-to-left functionality in key open source and open science softwares and solutions. Next slide, please. We do three core pillars of activity. The first one are these events which we're having now, which is our monthly community development activities. Now, these can be workshops or webinars or larger symposium like we're having today with multiple people sharing ideas. We also have working groups to address key issues and work on key projects affecting open science in the region. And then we also, as I said, we create resources, as I mentioned before. Now, these cover various different topics, predominantly guidance, but we also have just launched an open science journal for the region. It is a Diamond Open Access journal, and it basically covers anywhere. If you are working on any aspect of the implementation of open science policies and practices in the research communities you are involved with, then please do consider providing a case study for the journal. And then finally, we have the annual forum. Many of you will be familiar with it. It is our flagship event, and I'll talk about that more at the very end of the event later today. Also, if you do feel a pressing urge to comment on this session in any social media channel or platform, please do use the hashtag form for open. It's here at the bottom of the screen. And once again, welcome to those of you. We do still have some attendees trickling in, so welcome to all of you. We've finished the housekeeping slides, so I think we're ready to skip to the next one, please, Joe. So, libraries, and before anyone kicks on with this, brief speech here. Libraries and research institutions are tasked with supporting research activities. In the modern academic ecosystem, this not only means providing access to high-quality scholarly content, both print and digital, it also means supporting researchers in publishing new studies. Achieving both of these goals, while staying within often shrinking budgets, and also meet national and institutional directives regarding the production of open access research, can be challenging. As scholarly communications evolve in response to these pressures, publishers are coming up with new approaches to licensing and publishing content. One such approach is the Transformative Agreement, which moves contractual payment away from subscription-based reading and focuses on open access publishing under the Gold APC model. So almost every day right now, we see news announcements about a library signing a new Transformative Agreement with a publisher or a group of publishers. If you're in the publishing industry or the academic ecosystem, you also hear about ongoing negotiations that are perhaps not going so well, maybe stalling or dropped altogether. And occasionally, though it is becoming more common, you hear about transformative agreements that have been rejected or even cancelled. In fact, Spark has set up, for those of you who are interested, a very useful page of case studies for this latter group, where each library outlines its rationale for deciding against transformative agreements. And all of this kind of chaos in the marketplace can make it quite confusing for stakeholders. Should we embrace these agreements, or should we avoid them? What are the benefits and what are the disadvantages? And are they actually right for our institutions? And the matter is further complicated by the wide variety of potential options and possible outcomes. And as we try and work out what makes an agreement transformative, what does read and publish actually mean, and what will such an agreement actually cost over the longer term in both financial and logistical contexts? Now, today's event was organised to effectively, we hope, demystify transformative agreements and offer a free and hopefully very frank exploration of the benefits and disadvantages for libraries, for researchers, for publishers, and for the wider academic ecosystem. Our goal is to provide the information to empower all of you joining us today to decide if transformative agreements are right for you. And to this end, we are genuinely very excited to have brought together a team of expert panelists. Some are publishers and some are librarians. Some advocate for transformative agreements, and some might urge you to avoid them. But before they introduce themselves, I just want to do a quick survey to see if your views change over the course of this event. So if you could all scan this QR code on your phones or go to www.menti.com, which is the link at the bottom on one side, and then type in this code, so 88739325, the one highlighted in yellow. And we have, I'll leave this up for a couple of seconds so all of you can do this. And then we will ask you one question. It won't take very long, but please, everyone joining us, all 60 odd of you, please do take the time to fill this in, because we really want to see if this discussion will change your view by the end of the event. So it'll be very interesting for us, and I think for all of you to see what the general view is, the general consensus. So that's probably enough time. We'll skip over to the next slide now, please. But if you didn't catch a chance to get the link, you can see it in the chat. Yeah, so Mira, the screen sharing wasn't working there when you jumped onto the Menti link itself. If you could skip to the Menti link and I'll read out the question. So you're all probably there. While the screen is being shifted, I will ask a question. Would you encourage your institution to opt for a transformative agreement? Now, the answers in question, Mira, if you can jump to the question and the answers now, that would be great. The answers are yes, definitely, no, definitely not, maybe, I don't know enough to make a decision yet, or what is a transformative agreement? So this is really interesting. So far, transformative agreements are winning, though we have only had about 20. I know there's another 40 of you here who are hiding away and not sharing your views. So please do all log in and share your views. This will be very important so we can see if people change their minds by the end of the session. Don't be shy, it's totally anonymous. So yeah, I'm genuinely, it's very interesting to see that it's predominantly a firm yes, though personally I find transformative agreements rather confusing, so I can't, I'm glad I'm not the only one to be sitting in the sort of 4 to 6 green and pink categories. Does anyone else want to share some views? Anyone? There's still another 40 odd of you who have views, who are being secretive with your views. Well, we'll leave this one open for a few more minutes, even though we carry on talking. So while we're talking and our panelists are introducing themselves, please do consider filling this in anyway, because it would be genuinely, as I said, very interesting for all of us to see if there's a change in any of these. And Joy and Mira, before we revert to the next question around the back, if you could track the numbers, then we can be able to compare them later once we get through the session. So without further ado, if we jump back to our screens, I would like to introduce all of our panelists. What I'm going to do is call on each person to introduce yourselves and give a little summary of your expertise and interest in this topic. So first, Chris, as you're first on the list, perhaps you could introduce yourself briefly.
Sure, thanks so much. So my name is Chris Berg. I'm the director of the libraries at MIT. I also am founding director of a research center within the libraries called the Center for Research on Equitable and Open Scholarship. And both personally and MIT as an institution and MIT libraries specifically have a long history of advocating for open scholarship, including open access. I serve on the steering committee for SPARC, which many of you may be aware of that. It's an advocacy organization for libraries worldwide that advocates for policies and change towards more openness in science. I'm also working at the national level here on a number of advisory boards to try to understand how we can transition to a more open and equitable system of scholarship and science. I will say at present, we have at MIT, we're sharing over 60% of our faculty articles are openly accessible through our repository. And we're very proud of that fact. So got a fair amount of experience of trying to sort through which forms of open access will sort of meet the principles and goals that we have for the libraries as well as for science in general.
Thank you, Chris. And also thank you to both Chris and Erin, for those of you who might not have recognized from them being MIT. It is incredibly early in the morning for them, so we really are hugely grateful that they got up unfeasibly early at the crack of dawn to come and join us. So Erin, over to you.
Good morning or good afternoon where you all are. Thank you very much for having us today. I'm Erin Stahlberg. I work with Chris Berg at MIT Libraries. I am the Associate Director for Collections and Faculty Relations Strategy. So the collections includes our scholarly communications and collection strategy folks. It includes our publisher negotiations team, who works very closely with publishers to negotiate these contracts and or to imagine new ways of open scholarship. Sometimes or we're in conversations with publishers who are sort of not clear about how to move open forward in sustainable and equitable ways, and the staff in collection strategy are often sort of thinking through these issues with publishers. I also serve as the executive officer for our faculty committee for the library system, who has been great supporters and champions for thinking about how we do this in ways that help their scholarship move forward, which is our goal, is to help their scholarship move forward. And so thinking about goals and processes and strategies for them. I started at MIT in sort of spring of 2020 when we were making the decision to not accept a read and publish agreement from Elsevier. Chris, I'm sure as we go through, we'll talk more about that. And so also been involved in thinking about what are the alternative access mechanisms, what are the ways that we can serve our communities if we're not going to sign large-scale transformative agreements. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Erin. Dr. Abdullah, over to you. You're still on mute, Dr. Abdullah.
Okay, sorry for that. My name is Abdullah Al-Hafeiti. I am the assistant provost for the libraries here at Khalifa University in UAE. Actually, my experience start with open access publication before 7 or 6 years back, where the initiative come from the university that they would like to provide our faculty with an open access publication services. And we start with like 2 publishers, then right now we have about 6. And I think just she mentioned that she's running behind Elsevier to what's called to sign an agreement. And this is what we did exactly. We ran behind them for more than 4 years and successfully, alhamdulillah, last year, we signed an agreement with them. Actually, we use both modules of read and publish and per payment or per virtual payment for the APC. And we have the advantage and disadvantage for the, both of them. And we can talk about that later on. Thank you and welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. Amina? You're also on mute.
Yes, sorry, just a minute. Sorry, my mouse doesn't want to click properly. Hello, everyone. My name's Amina. I'm like Dr. Abdullah. I am in the UAE. I work with the UAEU University. I'm the electronic resources librarian and offer a lot of advice in the space of the APCs and transformative agreements. Coming from Australia and coming from also a publishing background, I've been dealing with APCs for a while, hearing about open access policies in the region, in the ANZ region, and then coming here in the UAE in 2019. This is when, towards the end of 2019. And the journey began then for the UAE. It's relatively a new area here in the region, or a new concept or business model, but we have different motivations as I will keep moving with the discussions. So it was an interesting journey. Really, in reality, I've been working on APCs for a couple of years. It was on my whiteboard and a lot of planning, a lot of strategizing until we got to the point where we also have signed off on several agreements, but with 3 major publishers, and we're very proud of the achievements. And we're still early stages, it's baby steps, and yeah, moving on from then. We'll see where we're all at the moment as we move on with the discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you, Amina. Carolyn.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for having me here, Emily, and welcome to everybody joining. My name's Carolyn. I'm the Vice President of Europe, Middle East and North Africa at Taylor & Francis. I'm based in Cambridge in the UK, so dialing in at a much more reasonable hour. I've been with Taylor & Francis for about 10 years now, and during that time, our direction of travel has been towards one of open research. But I think in the last kind of 5 to 6 years, we've seen a really significant acceleration of that. And partly that has been driven by the proportion of our agreements that now fall into read and publish or transformative agreement type definition. Largely this came out, to begin with at least, of some of our relationships in Europe, but it's very much now a global way of wanting to work with us. So this is something that I've been involved pretty closely in throughout the evolution of those agreements for us. So both on the negotiation side, but then also on the implementation side. So I think I'm looking forward to the discussion. I think it'll be really, really interesting to get into some of those topics today.
Thank you, Carolyn. And Asta?
Yeah, hello. So yeah, thank you for having me. I'm Asda Katani. I'm the Vice President for what we call Emerging EMEA. That's Eastern Europe, Africa, Middle East, and the Indian subcontinent, Central Asia. I've been in the industry for such a long time. I've been with Springer Nature since 2008. Back in the day, we used to be Springer. Since the merger 2015, we became Springer Nature, and I am involved in so many discussions to do with the TAs and the Transformative Agreement. So yeah, I'm looking forward for the rest of the discussion.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourselves. And also, once again, huge thanks for all of you joining in on this event. We're really looking forward to this. It's something that's been on my wish list to have for about 18 months now. So on a personal level, I'm very excited about this. So first of all, let's start with sort of the initial groundbreaking question and go from there and sort of focus on general knowledge first, and then we'll kind of dive into some of the pros and cons later on. So if one takes the recent scholarly kitchen definition that a contract is transformative and a transformative agreement if it seeks to shift the contracted payment from a library or group of libraries to a publisher away from subscription-based reading and towards open access publishing, if we're taking that as a sort of basis, Carolyn, could you give an outline of sort of how the agreement works in practice? What is a transformative agreement?
Yeah, absolutely. So a transformative agreement, as you just said, is a contract between either an individual institution and a publisher, or it can be with a consortia of libraries that have come together, and takes what's usually an existing relationship or contract for subscriptions, paying to read a set of journals, and actually converting either some of that spend or all of that spend to covering the publication rights for their affiliated authors to publish on a gold open access basis within those journals too. So essentially the outcome is that the affiliated authors, the eligible authors under that contract can go on to read the subscription content that is part of that agreement, but also then to publish on a gold open access basis at no cost to themselves, because the library has managed this, usually the library, on their behalf.
Thank you, Carolyn. And so there's lots of different types of agreements, different types of format, different types of structures. Asta, could you give us an overview of these and what the differences are for the libraries in practice if they go for one or other of these? And does it change if there's a library consortium or a single institution?
I mean, to be honest, and that's what we keep on saying, right? So there's no size fits all. So it really depends on the university, the consortia, the nation itself. I mean, at Springer Nature, obviously, we have all these different levels of agreements, yeah? And I think it depends on the level of subscriptions you have in a place, most importantly, numbers of articles you have each year from, the various institutions. Now, each publisher have so many different models, right? I mean, I was in India last week, and I hear so many different models, but I think we can say, as you mentioned earlier, there is a consensus in terms of transformative agreements consist of two parts, the read part and the publishing part. The question is how much will be in each pot, read versus publish. Overall, and I think that's what that's at least what I sensed as well, there is this, let's say, sense in terms of OA is being pushed by the publishers or certain business models being pushed by certain publishers. Reality is this has been, all started by the community itself, right? So it's all started by the community. Publishers were in a way forced to go to the route of open access. The majority have complied. Is there like one unified business model? Not really, not yet. Yeah, so I think that's also part of where we are now. We are in the transition period. The question is how long would it take? I mean, I myself was involved from transitioning from print to online, and now we see the OA transformation as well. So yeah, the question would be how long would it take and how can you achieve equity, right? Because initially I think there was this also very famous slogan in Europe, there is enough money in the system, and maybe it was correct, yes, mainly for Western Europe, where you looked at all the subscription values and the number of articles being published, and by transforming these to this, then yes, there is enough money in the system. Once we started pushing away from Europe and we, do the Asia, Middle East, and so on, and the rest of the world, even in the States, things are different. For example, in the States, we see a very decentralized approach. Each consortia, each state might have a different approach to things. And that's where I think we have to work with each other in terms of the industry and the community to try and see how we can harmonize things and achieve equity in the process.
Thank you. So I think some of those points are really interesting, and I can see Chris nodding frantically, but I might save them till slightly later when we do talk about some of the disadvantages, because I think that aligns better with that section. But there's one thing you mentioned there, and I'd really like to pick it up, and actually I think direct first to Chris and then maybe some of the other librarians, is when it comes to the negotiation, what is under discussion? Obviously, as he mentioned, a few of the things there, the number of subscriptions, the number of journals, the number of things people want to publish. But what are those sort of core building blocks that you bring to that discussion table when you sit down and go, okay, this is what we're talking about when we're talking about a transformative agreement as a librarian talking to a publisher or anything else? Sorry, that was quite a rambling question. I don't know if that was super clear.
The question to me or to Chris? Sorry.
So that was a question to Chris, and then I'll ask the other librarian, and I'll look back to you guys to see if there's anything else from the publisher's viewpoint.
Sure. Thank you so much. And I was nodding vigorously about the importance of equity, so I hope we do get to that point. So here at MIT, we actually have a framework that we rely on in our negotiations with publishers. And hopefully, Erin, yes, she did. She just dropped the link to that framework into the chat. And it is a principles-based framework. As Erin mentioned, we work very closely with our faculty committee on the libraries and with the deans and the senior leadership at MIT to come up with this framework, get it endorsed by the entire university. In fact, more than 200 libraries or consortium in the US have also endorsed this framework in principle. And again, it is very much principles-based and based on the value that MIT places on equity and openness in scholarship. To summarize, it really prioritizes authors' rights, and it prioritizes cost transparency. You'll see, and if you read the framework, that we make a point of saying we need to know what we're paying for and why it costs that much. That seems like a reasonable thing for consumers to want to know about a product that they are going to choose to either purchase or not purchase. And so that's what we're asking for. And so that framework is published openly, obviously. So we start there with publishers. And we sort of walk through the various elements of the framework and see whether publishers are willing to move towards those. We understand that we're asking for something that is different. We're actually not big fans of so-called transformative agreements, which we call pay-to-publish agreements, because we think they're, on the whole, bad for science and bad for scholarship. If you move,
save some of those for later.
Okay, I will save some of those.
Later, otherwise we'll cover up the whole conversation.
The short answer of how we negotiate is we rely on this framework that we spent a lot of time socializing that framework across MIT so that we knew that the institution and the faculty were behind us. They said, yes, go forth and negotiate based on these principles. And then they understood when we came back to them and said, for example, Elsevier was not able to come up with an offer for us that came anywhere close to moving towards the elements of that framework. And so we could go back to our community and say, we've signed these other agreements with publishers who were willing to work with us. This publisher, Elsevier, was not. And we walked away. We've been out of contract with Elsevier for 4 years now. We do not have a journals contract with Elsevier because they were not willing to meet this framework. So,
and that's an interesting point. I think we'll definitely pick up on that later when we come down to the disadvantages again. But moving on, so Amina, what were your priorities when you, what were you thinking about? Not whether it was a good or a bad idea, but just what were those kind of underlying building blocks that you were bringing to the table with regards to that negotiation?
Yes, Emily, yes. We've been working on APCs mainly for a couple of years. The idea wasn't, what's the word? There was no appetite initially in the first couple of years or when I started with the project So there was a complete work on the internal kind of framework, kind of trying to change the perception what even open access was. So unlike America, Europe, or Australia, where things are a little bit more mature in that space, it was more of an internal challenge. So what I had to bring to the table was kind of a cost analysis of how much will we be saving, how much visibility, how much. So the motivations behind having transformative agreements, or lead and publish agreements for that matter, included not just a bundled agreement for library and research output, but was also, there was other elements. So in the Middle East, or here in the UAE, we relied heavily on often different funds coming to the library. So I waited for the right opportunity to bring on board the APCs, bundled up with other agreements. So it was more of a cost analysis that we were saving across the board and trying to reinvest money into more infrastructure for research. So that was kind of the motivation from a library's perspective. But there was quite challenging internally because we had to work on so many fronts and bring all the stakeholders, and different stakeholders had different views on these things. So we weren't able to move in until they really saw the cost savings. So it's more the motivation of how much we're saving and how do we translate that into our visibility and our ranking. And so the motivations here are quite clearly different to what they are probably in the US and Europe. Yeah, so here we are today. We're talking about what's going to happen in the next phase. So it's more of a pilot for us to see and test the waters, what works, what doesn't work, rather than long-term commitment. And as we are doing that, we're also getting buy-in internally. And I think that's for us was our major challenge. Luckily enough, publishers here were very accommodating to the needs of what we had here. They understood our motivations, which are clearly very different. Whether it's perfect or not, we still have to see, we still have to review. We need lots and lots of data to analyze where we went wrong, what are the opportunities for the next steps, and moving forward with other agreements.
Thank you, Amina. So coming back to that point of which you've touched on there, and we'll go into costs in more detail later when we really dive down into benefits and disadvantages. But just a quick one, I think, which I know a number of people often wonder, and I think it's quite a good part of the overview discussion, is coming back to our publishers here now, is obviously we've all seen the news. Publisher profits are doing pretty well right now in comparison perhaps to historic. So what is it that you're paying for when you pay for a transformative agreement or if you're paying for Gold Open Access or any of those, what is it specifically that people are paying for? And why is there an assumption, rightly or wrongly, that it is costing so much more than the print subscription used to? Carolyn, you're off mute, so I'm guessing you're really keen to answer that one straight away.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I wanted to pick up on Amina's point. I think it's interesting to consider the motivations for these agreements, because I think that's something that we've really seen change, certainly as we've worked with more organisations and outside of Europe. So I think originally the idea of moving into a transformative agreement was so heavily driven by funder mandates that you asked earlier about sort of when you sit down at the table and what's brought to the table. And this does, relate to what's actually being paid for. And it was really about how do we open up 100% of our research at scale in a very short time frame with our existing budget. So that was kind of the mandate that was set to a lot of the consortia that we started working with originally, where we would sit down with them to renew an existing contract. And they would have a really specific set of requirements as to what the new agreement should look like. And generally, that was kind of what we've been talking about is, we need all of our authors to be publishing on a Gold Open Access basis. We need it by this date. And this is the budget that we have available, which is based on our subscription spend. So those were kind of the criteria that we were working within. Since then, and obviously a lot of that was driven by some of the mandates that came out of Coalition S. I think over the years and as we've worked with a broader range of stakeholders on these types of agreements, we've really seen that change. So, for example, now we might sit down with an institution now who says, actually, our goal here is to try and improve our university rankings. And so what we want to do is to only look at the top quartile journals we want to invest in these particular set of researchers because we know that's going to affect our rankings the most. And so again, in terms of coming back to what's being paid for, that would then really be looking at, okay, well, what's your research profile? In our case, obviously with Taylor and Francis, where are those authors already publishing? Where perhaps is there already some movement towards open access? And taking all those things into consideration. In other situations, we've been asked far more about the sort of researcher support that might go with these agreements. So, for example, looking at supporting in how to get published, how to encourage open research uptake, alongside the sort of more standard kind of contractual negotiation around number of articles and things like that. And so that's something that would also be included in that sort of situation. So I think, it was Astar mentioned earlier about there is no one size fits all. And I think my sense is that people get a bit sick of publishers saying that, but it genuinely seems to be the case, is that every negotiation, every partnership we sit down to, more and more so now, I think, does seem to differ in terms of what's motivating it. And then what is, a priority as to where they want to allocate budget. I think in terms of what's actually being paid for, obviously under a transformative agreement, we're talking about Gold Open Access. So it's the version of record on the publisher's site that's being made open access. And what we're spending a lot of time doing, we're actually developing a specialist team within Taylor and Francis to look at, is what's the impact of this? I think a lot of the discussions around the move to open access tend to focus on quantity, so how many articles are now open. But actually, what impact has that gone on to do? What with all of the kind of discoverability on the platform, if there is no paywall to that article, what kind of reach and engagement do we then have? And I think that's something that we're really starting to measure more closely, and I think is an inherent part of the value of Gold Open Access. When you're asking about what do these agreements provide, whilst at the same time, of course, we know this transition isn't all happening at the same rate globally. So there's still a significant amount of research being published on a subscription basis from various disciplines, various parts of the world. And so obviously, the costs of those agreements also go to paying for access for those alongside. So I think in terms of the value that institutions are getting, as I say, I think it really does seem to depend on the driver behind wanting to even consider one of these agreements. And for that, there's a pretty broad range, depending who we're talking to.
Okay, and we've normally I was going to wait for questions, but I think this one's quite germane in the overall flow of things. So obviously there's lots of different things, lots of different models one could pay in. Astor as well, if you want to jump in at this point after I've asked this question, I think people will be quite interested as well, is obviously this is around the gold model. But why is it that publishers have chosen the gold, not say the diamond model where they just charge the journal owner a much smaller fee? And therefore within that, how much of the contract overhead, or rather the publisher's overhead, is embedded within those transformative agreement contracts?
So let me just go one step back, actually, because I think it all depends. It's all based on the foundation itself. Yeah, the fact if universities, researchers do believe publishers do add value, which I think, we've came to the conclusion that we do, because we hear the arguments in terms of we can do it ourselves. Yeah, I mean, and again, yes, maybe, but obviously, there is. I think Springer Nature is almost 180 years old worth of experience, right? Now, to your earlier question as well, and I think I will add on to what Carolyn just mentioned in terms of why certain things cost that much. There are so many hidden charges nobody seems to pay attention to. I mean, for example, the rejection charges, right? Meaning, what I mean is, we have certain titles which the rejection is up to 92%. It means an editor has to read 92 articles to accept 8. Yeah, that's all cost. The cost of running a business, from HR to legal to everything, involved in running a business. All these charges has to be considered in terms of the overall cost. At the same time, as Carolyn mentioned, the current business model has been mainly dictated by Plan S, to be honest. The publisher has been reactive, more than proactive. Now we started getting, being more proactive in terms of building certain offerings. Now, to the question of a green versus gold, if you want to maintain a green, then you will have to keep all the subscription fees as is, because for us to be able to publish and make these journals available, the fee has to come from somewhere. If everything is available, yeah, in a green format, you will never achieve equity in terms of having these article costs paid for somehow. Now, the question is obviously, again, you say, why not Diamond? I think, again, depends on the publisher. We have all the business models. Yeah? So we have Gold, we have Diamond, we have so many different business models, but this is a bit more complex because it depends on, is it a journal, is it a society journal? Is it a journal owned by the publisher? Is it a hybrid journal? Is it fully OA journal? So really, it's not just one type of journal and everything could be Diamond open access. You have to look at the type of the journals, the type of the society, the type of, and again, the most important thing is the author choice. What does the author want, right? So this all has to be taken in consideration when we decide which business model you want to go down with. I mean, I can tell you, for example, and the majority of this call would know, we have a partnership with EKB in Egypt. Yeah, it's one of the biggest agreements we have in the region. And they have a combination of Diamond, fully sponsored Egyptian journals, which we publish on their behalf, their society, and also the Gold Open Access, which is the open access agreement. And this also comes in two forms: the fully open access journals, which is fully born, open and it stays open, and those hybrid journals, which have the combination of both, depends on the author choice. So it's a bit more complex, and we can dissect it as we go throughout the call. But yeah, that's what I thought to say for now.
Thank you. So before we move on to advantages, which is the next session, I have one more question, predominantly, I think, Asta, for you and Carolyn, but if anyone else wants to jump in as well, please feel free. But when we're taking a huge step back, just sort of to round up our overview, is when we talk about global trends. Obviously, you guys have mentioned, there is clearly growing appetite. There's growing appetite from the publisher's perspective across the region. Amina and Abdullah, you've both obviously your evidence of that growing appetite because you're embracing transformative agreements already. And so as publishers, which regions are seeing the strongest growth and highest uptake of these agreements, if you don't mind me asking? And are there any patterns? So is it any types of institution or fields of study that are perhaps more dominant in embracing transformative agreements more generally? Or are there no patterns and it's a complete sort of global hodgepodge?
I can start by answering that one. So at Taylor & Francis, we have about 45 transformative agreements in total now, covering just over 1,000 individual institutions. That's up from about 50 institutions in 2017, I think. So it's been quite a rapid increase. What we've seen this year for the first time, so this is the very first year where just by number of agreements, it's about 50-50 across Europe and then rest of the world. So we are seeing that kind of global appetite, as you mentioned. In terms of trends, I think that there isn't a sort of a particular region that is suddenly accelerating in the way that the European market did a few years ago. So across the US, in Asia Pacific, here in the Middle East, in sub-Saharan Africa, we're starting to have those conversations pretty much everywhere. We've got dedicated teams being set up in all of those regions to start working more intensely on open research programs with partners there. So in that sense, there's no one particular regional trend. What we have seen is a real clear trend in terms of discipline. So at Taylor & Francis, 75% of our content that's published under a transformative agreement is in HSS. And that compares with about 85% of our Gold OA articles are in STEM. And I think this is no surprise. We all know that there is, significantly more funding available for APCs for open access in STEM. And so for us as a predominantly social sciences publisher, this has been kind of a dilemma that we've faced over the past few years in terms of how do we make that sustainable transition when there just isn't APC funding available for that model. So we do have a portfolio of full Gold OA journals that operate on an APC basis. We also have a number of journals that operate on a Diamond model, as you mentioned, Emily. And we have a range of partners. So some of these are societies, some of them are institutions, some of them are funders that fund that journal and make them free to read and free to publish for the author. But what we've seen in terms of the amount of HSS OA publishing, transformative agreements have been the biggest game changer for us. That's been the biggest block of funding that's enabled HSS researchers to publish open access. And what it's also kind of proven, I think, is that if the funding and the workflow infrastructures are there, then the appetite is there. I think, there was a lot of discussion several years ago about, there's kind of trends in STEM researchers that they want to publish OA and it's just not there in HSS. And I think what transformative agreements have done is prove that that's not the case, that if we can get the business models right, if we can put the funding and the workflows there, then we can see a transition across all of the disciplines.
And Asda, is that broadly similar for Springer as well?
I mean, to be honest, so I think, for us, the portfolio is slightly more, slightly bigger in terms of STM versus HSS. I mean, we have now 66 TAs globally, literally from Japan to California. We serve almost 3,700 institutions within these TAs. So for us as well, I think what we see Gold as being the primary driver in terms of the business model. I think, the majority of the institutions are believing in the value of the OA transition. I think there was one study commissioned by the Chief Science Officer in Australia, where she showed, she actually commissioned Ernst & Young to do the analysis, and she has proven basically that over a period of 10 to 20 years, even the impact of the economy, by having the research being available for everyone to use, it has a huge impact. So I think nobody is arguing against the value of OA. I think the problem is obviously once, as I said earlier, once you start moving away from, let's say, mainly Plan S funders countries, you see the difficulties with the funding level, right? So that's when you start hearing certain consortia or governments saying, look, we can't cover everything we publish, and therefore we have to prioritize. And that's where I think it becomes a bit difficult, because then you start sacrificing equity, in terms of who gets published. And that's where, potentially, I think will be let's say, the more difficult part of finding the way forward. How can you really manage to get everyone published, yet make it affordable for those countries or consortia to afford it? I mean, for example, Springer Nature, our commitment to OA is very visible. I think, by the end of this year, 50% of our entire publications throughout 3,000 journals will be in open access. Just so it speaks to the volume and speaks to the commitment of Springer Nature. So we are being creative, we are being accommodating as we can, but also we need to make sure it's a fair treatment for everyone.
Okay, thank you. So before we dive into that meaty question of equity and disenfranchisement, that I think really comes to the core of some of the challenges and disadvantages that people see, not just with transformative agreements, but with the Gold model in general. And I know that I can see Chris waiting to jump on that topic. But before we kind of circle into that, I think it'd be quite interesting to circle back to Dr. Abdullah and Dr. Amina, who we know are, embracing transformative agreements. And Dr. Abdullah in particular, obviously, as you mentioned, you have an awful lot of different agreements, with Khalifa University, with various publishers. Why is it that you specifically pursued a transformative agreement with Elsevier in particular? I remember when you signed it this time last year, because we announced it at our annual forum. So what was it? What was the specific advantages that you saw for the university, for the library, and for the researchers?
Thank you. I would like to highlight here on the agreement with the publisher. I mean, there is no standard, unfortunately. We looking forward to make things clear, and instead of just signing a contract with the publisher for 1 year, I mean here read and publish contract. And unfortunately, there is no flexibility from the publisher, for example, to carry forward the tokens. And this is very important for us. However, when we use the models of just pay as per articles, that give us more flexibility, and we extend sometime the date of the expired of those tokens. This is very important for us and give us more flexibility when we deal with the open access. Just recently, we signed the only read and publish contract with the ACS, and running, I mean, successfully, very well, and almost for 1 year right now. We get a little bit discounts than going for the individual, but in the same time, we are looking for other publisher to be like more cooperative with us and work with us closely. I mean, and to be like more flexible when we came to the payment itself. Yani. Now, I don't want to add more pressure on the library budget while already shrinking, okay? And sign and read and publish contract with the many publisher, and I'm not sure if those tokens will be used by our faculty or not. One of the important things that the different or the change of the standard of the guidelines coming from the university itself. As I mentioned to you, I mean, and we start with the accepting like an Q1 and Q1 for our faculty to publish. Then the university, they changed the standard from the Q1 to the 10%, to the 15%. That also will give put us under pressure in terms of the selection, or select the specific journals that we deal with. Some of, I mean, like an important point here, I'm not sure about it, and it's not clear to me. The hybrid one, I mean, the hybrid journals. Sometimes they're asking for additional, charge. Sometimes also for the long articles, if the articles more than 10 pages, also they charge us more. I mean, there is no, standard, no direction, clear to me when we starting negotiate with the publisher. Each publisher, they come up with different criteria and different options for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. So obviously what's coming up in these discussions is that equity, which we'll talk about more, is very important, but so too are that flexibility of, you as the client, you need people, and Amina, you mentioned the same thing, you need the publishers to work with you and meet your needs. And then obviously, Chris, you flagged transparency, and everyone's mentioned costs. Obviously, costs is the driver for all of us with budgets and everything else. But Chris, coming back to you again, you mentioned in our earlier discussions, you guys do actually at MIT, you do have 1 or 2 transformative agreements still sort of in the bag. Was there a particular reason that you kept those? Was there a particular advantage that you saw in those ones? And why did you keep those ones, and potentially we'll talk about why you discarded the others later, but why was it that you kept those ones? What were those advantages?
Yeah, again, just to be very clear, we do leverage the framework for all of our negotiations. And so the ones we've signed have been ones that where the publisher has been willing to work with us towards meeting the elements of those framework, and where they've been willing to work with us on ensuring that the contract provides some transparency into what we're paying for. Erin actually is the one who leads our negotiations team. They report to her. I don't actually, and so I want to kind of throw it to her to let her talk more specifically about some of the pay to publish agreements that we have agreed to, and why, and what our trajectory is.
Thanks. Erin, over to you.
Thanks, Chris. So it feels to me like there's a premise here, a very binary premise here around transformative agreements, sort of they're good or they're not good, right? And so I think what I'd like to do is say, and we're very careful to try to use the words read and publish, because they do not seem to be transforming anything, really. We're not getting to a place that's really transformative. So the agreements that we have, the read and publish agreements that we have, much like Abdullah just said, really depend on the nature of the agreement. And so because we're evaluating the proposals against the framework, we have signed read and publish agreements that we feel like are moving towards elements of the framework, where the publishers are moving actively towards elements of the framework. We definitely believe that there's costs involved with publishing, and we're willing to pay those costs. What we want to understand is where those costs are going, and so read and publish agreements that explain to us where those costs are going, we are more likely to sign. And we're trying to, and we are less interested in just paying for the overhead. We're less interested in the amount of profit that is being made, right? And so, agreements that can explain to us what the cost of publishing is, are the kinds that we sign. The ones that are more transparent, the ones that are looking towards actually moving a full portfolio towards open over a schedule where we can see the end goal. The other thing, the framework, as Chris mentioned, talks about authors' rights, and we're interested in the rights of our authors, regardless of whether or not they're the corresponding author, which is another big thing for us. So our read and publish contracts only cover our corresponding authors. And so we're interested in trying to figure out how to move the whole system forward so that regardless of whether or not the MIT author is a corresponding author or not, they are able to publish without fees in open ways. So it really depends on the agreement that's put forward in front of us and whether or not it's moving the bullet points of the framework forward. And then of course with the overall prices, we're obviously concerned about what the overall price is and the affordability and the sustainability of that overall pricing. But we're not. It's not that we either do sign them or don't sign them or try to jettison them or don't try to jettison them. It's that what are the elements of the framework that we are trying to forward, and how does this read and publish align, and how does this the publisher's goals align with MIT's goals?
Thank you, Erin. That's really interesting, and I'm sure probably also very interesting for Carolyn and Asta as well to see some of what the librarians are thinking behind the scenes when they are faced with these agreement drafts. So coming back to the cost again, because obviously we're still circling that, and then we'll move on to potentially the disadvantages and things. Just one final question around this, because it is something I myself am interested in, and I'm sure a number of our attendees are also curious about, is obviously from the publisher perspective, Carolyn and Asta, I'm sure you hope that the clients, if they sign an agreement, will see a cost reduction. That's presumably part of the idea versus, you're not paying to publish and paying to read separately. That's the whole package. But when we go to the librarians, so Amina and Abdullah, you're trialing these processes now. Have you seen cost reductions? Are they in line with what one would hope? Because I'm sure that's probably the burning question for 90% of the librarians attending right now.
Yes, absolutely. There has been cost reductions, and I think again we're talking about maybe we're in a region where it's a little bit of an anomaly, because in the MENA region you have the Gulf states, which are capable of that have some purchasing power, and we're in a position to negotiate heavily on some of the products. But we also when we think we have to look at the objectives of why we're doing what we're doing. And when it comes to APCs, and in particular, in our case here, we looked at a couple of elements, and it wasn't just APCs that motivated us, but we wanted to bring on board this project and bring it to light because we wanted to highlight the importance of publishing in the open access space. So again, it comes back to the motivation in the region and the maturity of these concepts here. But we also had a chronic, we needed to build our collections. And so we brought on board negotiations with collections. We brought on board. So it was not just a bundle deal with read and publish, but it was also building collections. So which raises the importance that librarians play a pivotal role here in bringing on board all the needs and trying to pick and choose what will work for them, but at the same time show an extremely well structured cost-benefit analysis across the board. This was the way we were able to motivate different levels of management here at the university, because because the concept is so new and it's a young university, ranking is important, visibility is important. We had to bring on board all of these elements. We had to kind of sell the idea so that there's a high level of acceptance and buy-in from various stakeholders. Researchers were already bought in, librarians were already bought in. But we had, okay, now we need the funding, we need the extra, how much is it going to cost us? Without a clear cost-benefit analysis of how much we're really saving across the board over not just the first year, the second year and third year, it was very difficult to justify. But we kind of will hit snags if there's no buy-in. And what we need from publishers is, again, as Dr. Hafiti mentioned, we need flexibility. We need to test the waters, and so to speak, it has to be very attractive because we're talking to different people with different levels of understanding of what libraries do. Even the very concept that libraries involved in this space is very foreign in this region. So sometimes the great, what you're doing is great. You're bringing for the first time in the past couple of years, the research aspect and the library aspect bundled together. And it helps a lot. So yeah, we're looking forward to the next steps. And I think UAE is probably unique to many other universities in terms of size and scope as well. So the larger the university, obviously, the more savings we make. If you're talking at consortia levels, some universities might miss out. The digital divide, even the equity here is, again, diverse in the region. So we're grappling with multiple challenges, and the publishers need to be on board with these challenges. The people on the ground understand the challenges here in the region, but when it comes to the US or European head offices, I don't know how well they're versed with the challenges libraries face here in the region. We can't have a one-size-fits-all. We are unique in so many different ways. And we're trying to be something for everybody as well. And we can never please them, even with the APCs. Everybody gets excited. But the biggest challenge is, how do you make everybody happy? And why do some people feel left out? STEM is obviously taking on board, again, for the ranking purposes, the visibility, the citations. There's so much focus on ranking here that it again offers sometimes to a disadvantage. But anyway, I mean, it's a journey and we're still exploring, and we just need the assistance of, people with the expertise on how we can customize to scale this region so we have a real transformative agreement that works, because as an Arabic-speaking region, most of the people in humanities miss out. Where are they in this equation?
If I could just interject here, because that's the perfect tee for the question about equity that we really want to engage with here, because obviously, transformative agreements tend to be restricted to the journals that you have within your publisher portfolio. How many of those are going to be within the subject field? How many of those are going to be within the subject language? Carolyn, I know you mentioned that, and I was genuinely surprised at that, the social sciences and humanities have more growth with transformative agreements, which is very interesting to know. But what happens if you don't have a journal, if a library pays and you don't have a journal that's got the right language, or you only have one journal in the subject field? A reputable journal should only be publishing maximum 2 articles from a given author in every 3 to 5 year cycle. If one's used it, let's say travel writing. I recently published an article in the Studies of Travel Writing with Taylor Francis, so that one's on the top of my head right now. I published in that. I can't publish in that for another 3 to 5 years. If you have nothing else in my field, where do I go? How does it work? And how does all of that and the language and everything tie in with that sort of broader questions of equity and accessibility, given the very fragmented and highly diverse circumstances, specifically within our region, but also more generally? Carolyn, would you like to answer as you're off mute right now? And then Chris, I'll bounce the question over to you afterwards.
Yeah, sure. I think, it's a huge topic and question, isn't it? I think there's a couple of things that perhaps will sort of be related to this. I think one of the places that we've been really pleased to recently reach a transformative agreement, and actually I would agree with Erin, we also prefer read and publish to transformative agreement, but yeah, one of the places we've recently reached an agreement like this is in South Africa, and this is This was slightly different to anywhere else we've put one of these in place for a lot of the reasons that you're talking about. We actually have a co-publishing program there already in partnership with the University of South Africa, with the National Inquiry Service Centre. And so kind of working out how do we make sure that the authors of those locally published journals, which have completely different pricing structure, local currencies, all of those kind of things, how does that fit into one of these sort of bigger agreements? So that's been a really interesting experience for us as a publisher, I think, because we were able to work with them to come to an agreement to find a way that we could meet those needs, and particularly around the kind of research and support element that I mentioned earlier as well, that was a real priority for them. Again, to ensure the sort of equity of who's participating in these, that it's not just the existing set of researchers that know exactly how to, you know, navigate the system, the best chances of getting their article published, but actually making sure we're opening it up beyond that, perhaps to early career researchers, to different kind of smaller institutions within that consortia as well. So that's been quite an interesting experience, and one that I think we're keen to replicate where you know, we have the opportunity to do so. I think the other aspect that we're looking at, and this came out of a couple of roundtables that we hosted earlier in the year, one in Spain, one in Ireland, so both European focused, but again, that sort of point on equity. And one of the key topics that came up was authors who are not necessarily affiliated with an academic institution. So if we think about, for example, the healthcare system, and a lot of the research and not even traditional research output types, like a sort of research article that we're all quite familiar with, but if we think about case studies coming out of hospitals, for example, how many of those are then published open access? And so I think that's an area that we're really keen to start exploring is, you know, we've got a sort of foundation set of these agreements in place, and as we think about what comes next and how do we evolve them, I think it is really looking at that broader set of participation, and being able to have access to that sort of funding and infrastructure that the existing set of academic authors have to. So I'm not saying we've got all the answers, but it's definitely an area that I think we're keen to explore, and that I see as kind of the, you know, the next step in the journey of these types of partnerships.
Thank you. And Chris, over on your side, from the librarian perspective, what are the key aspects? Obviously, equity in scholarly communications, it's such a complex term, and it's really at the core of the whole open model that Spark was propagating, and the Barcelona Declaration has been doing so for a number of years now. So where do you see the sort of key touch points within this with regards to this specific discussion?
Yeah, I mean, if I could just talk at a fairly broad level, right? What, you know, under a subscription model, there's a barrier to reading, right? That creates an inequity in who gets access to read things and to benefit from accessing scholarship. Under any kind of pay-to-publish model, whether it's a transformative agreement or individual authors paying APCs out of research grants or wherever else they're getting the money, you're just moving that wall from blocking people to access to read scholarship to blocking people's access to publish their scholarship. And Carolyn actually pointed out quite a few of the concerns. Often it is humanities and social science scholars who either aren't covered by these read and publish deals and don't have grant funding in the U.S. at least to pay on their own, right? So essentially, at least under a subscription model, you know, you've got interlibrary borrowing and other ways in which disadvantaged readers who don't have their own subscription or aren't affiliated with a well-resourced institution that has a subscription, they can eventually get access to read something. Under a pay-to-publish model, if you're a scholar who doesn't have funding to publish your research, you don't have other options. You can't, you know, there's no interlibrary borrowing to, you know, we can't publish on behalf of someone from another institution under our agreement. So the inequity just really widens here when you start to move from a it's not just moving the paywall, but you're actually really affecting, I think, the integrity of scholarship as a whole by putting an economic barrier in front of the ability to publish.
Asta, before we move on to the next section, do you have a quick response to this?
No, absolutely, and I slightly disagree with Chris because, I mean, first of all, comparing a world before read and publish, nobody had access to the content unless you pay for it. While now, and what we see globally, 70% of the entire usage we get as Springer Nature is from anonymous IP addresses we never had before. I can't even know where it's coming from because they've never been registered with Springer Nature. So there is a huge uplift globally, yeah, in terms of accessing the content, which is a huge step forward for equity, yeah, comparing 10 years ago. So that's one. The second part is, yes, depends on the organization, the funding agency, which part of where you are. If you're part of a national agreement in Germany, for example, any article get published, yeah, almost, depends, or in the UK, or in South Africa, yeah, or in Poland. So it depends really where you are. And that's, again, it's a huge step forward because, again, 10 years ago, nobody used to get published unless they had the fund themselves. By now, things get picked by funders, yeah, by personal funds. At the same time, and I think, you know, the majority of the publishers, the big ones, again, I think at least for Springer Nature, we have our own waiver program. Springer Nature last year waived 26 million euros worth of APCs. We are the largest publishers by far, waiving, yeah, not just from LMIC, no, even from developed countries. It depends on the situation itself. Diamond journals, we do a lot. Why? Purely because, yes, it doesn't matter where the journal sits. The example I gave of Egypt, plenty of those authors will be from Africa, will be from India, will be from different parts of the world. Those are now have the chance and the opportunity to be published. We have now published as well, we have now released our tier pricing for LMIC. Yeah, we have 146 titles now subject to discounts as high as 75%, depends on where you are. So there is so much being done by the publishers just to try and level the playing field, to be honest. But would you have a perfect system? Not truly. I think the whole transition now is still in its infancy, if you like it or not.
Thank you. And I think that tees us up nicely in a roundabout way to return to the question of the framework. Aaron, I know when you guys at MIT, when you evaluated those transformative agreements that you were proposed, you created this, obviously you mentioned this very, very comprehensive framework, and you also did a very in-depth sort of data analysis of everything. Could you share what some of your findings showed and what you considered to be the negative aspects, perhaps either challenges or disadvantages, whichever term you prefer, of adopting these transformative agreements that the publishers offered you, so that therefore you then went for alternative approaches?
Sure, yeah. So it's all part of the same package. So Elsevier, which is the publisher for which we have most notably are now out of contract. That was a combination of not being able to move forward on any of the goals of the framework, and a combination of running the numbers and determining what it is costing the institute both to pay to publish and to read. And so when we look at those numbers, and to Elsa's point earlier that there's enough money in the system, it depends on whether you're comparing against your earlier subscription contracts and whether or not we're sort of measuring that as a comparator versus looking at other ways to provide access to the content. So our decision, for example, not to move forward with Elsevier was not so much grounded in the financials; it was grounded in being able to move that publisher towards the terms of the contract. Once we terms of the framework. Once we determined that we couldn't get to a read and publish that would be agreeable to us based on the terms of the framework, we started looking at alternative ways to provide access to the Elsevier content. And so, at MIT, we're using a document delivery service, a commercial document delivery service, to provide access to the content for which we are not currently subscribed and don't have a read and publish to cover. And that is working for us at a fraction of the cost that we were paying before. Similarly, Chris and I were just on a Spark call with the University of Connecticut, which is also has moved to, sort of article pay-per-view as a methodology for getting access to the titles that they are not in contract, they're not in read contract for. So thinking about what is the overall cost to the Institute. So we are, as we've conveyed, we're also not fans of APCs. We don't want that to be Gold APCs to be the model forward. But in fact, for MIT, we are paying less as an overall institution to pay those individual APCs than we would have been paying for the proposed read and publish contract. And so that's one of the things that we really like to say to folks is that we shouldn't just be comparing against our subscription contracts. We should be looking at the total cost to the institution of paying to publish and paying to read, and determining and really looking at those numbers to see whether or not that is financially, does it financially compare for you? For MIT, it does not financially.
That's a really interesting point. Are there any other, leaving aside advantages or disadvantages, but are there any other core things that someone should think about? If there's a librarian, and we have an awful lot of them with us here today, if a librarian is coming in and making these decisions, you're saying you should compare the costs across the whole gamut. Are there any other things that you should just be thinking about, just in the back of your mind, just thinking, this is what I need to have in my tick box, my question list?
Yeah, again, for MIT, we did a lot of work with that framework. Chris really vetted it. Chris and the team really vetted it with the faculty and really ensured that the MIT faculty were behind it. And so waivers, for example, is a deal breaker for MIT in many, many cases, right? That is really important to us, that both our corresponding authors and our non-corresponding authors who may not be covered by a read and publish at this institution are able to publish without waiving the rights to deposit green into our open access repository. So that is definitely a tick box that we are looking for. Again, understanding what is going into the cost pricing. Most of the RMPs are based on either prior subscription cost or they're based on the APC cost. And since we're trying to move away from that, really understanding if we're not going to value an RMP based on subscription cost or based on APC cost, what are we going to value an RMP on? Like, what is the cost to the publisher for those items? So I hate to always come back to the framework, but for MIT, we're always coming back to the framework. Is the pricing transparent? Do the authors have to waive their rights? We also, we have bullets in there about long-term preservation access. Happy to report, and certainly for the publishers on the call, that the publishers also believe in long-term preservation through locks and clocks and Portico, and so that's one we're usually able to tick quickly. But that's another thing that libraries should be important to libraries, is making sure that this content preserves into the long term.
Thank you.
So
yeah. Dr. Abdullah,
can I jump in really quick
sorry,
for
Chris,
a bit more, just a bit more advice for the librarians on the call? Is simply to remember that the publishers are trying to sell you a product. We are the consumers, and we have every right to negotiate the terms of that product, of that sale. And we should think about all of our alternatives. Right. Again, Erin emphasized, we typically go into a negotiation trying to get a deal, and our baseline is whatever our last deal was with that publisher. And I just want to encourage folks to think about other options. Right now, MIT, one of the leading research institutions in the world, does not have a journals contract with Elsevier, one of the leading science publishers in the world, because in our estimation, and we have the numbers, not our estimation, our analysis, going per article, both to read and to publish, works for our institution, and it's significantly cheaper. So I just want to encourage librarians to think carefully and do the analysis about what your options are. We often think that our only option is what we had before and what the publisher is putting on the table. And I encourage you to be more expansive about what your options are and to negotiate with some confidence.
Thank you, Chris. Dr. Abdullah and Amina, but maybe Dr. Abdullah, because we haven't heard from you in a while. How many of those factors and criteria were you considering when you made your decision?
See, I'm still insist that we need carefully to review the current practice with the publisher. To me, we taken a decision that we will not move with the read and publish contract or with the publisher until we really see some advantage, and we will save a lot of money. I mean, if we decide to go with the read and publish, as the current situation or the current practice, we feel, as I mentioned to you, that there is a more flexibility to us. Sometime we actually receive an additional budget on the end of the year. That give us also more flexibility to deal with that. And if there is a shortage, or we would like, for example, to use the budget, current year budget, to fulfill the needs for like 2 years in advance and buy more tokens, that give us also more flexibility. We need, the publisher to show us some advantage and convince us to go with the read and published. One of the important challenges that for sure we cannot sign an agreement with the all publisher, and sometime we individually get like a request from the faculty. They would like to publish on a specific journals. When we reach out to the publisher, they said, sorry, even you need to go with the package, or we are not supporting individual requests. So this is some of the challenges that we are facing here. For this reason, we feel comfortable to move with the current practice until we see something like change happen on the approach of the publisher themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Asta, would you like to respond on behalf of all the publishers to what everyone's been saying?
I don't think I can, but at least from my on behalf of Spring and Nature, at least. I think Chris really hits the nail on the head, right? In the end, it's just like you buying grocery or buying a house or buying a car. In the end, it's what you need, right? And you should only spend money on really what you need and what it makes sense. At the same time, just to make sure, we keep things clear, as in the only time I hear a consortia or a university is stopping a certain subscription is always to do with that publisher, which I won't say its name. That's also, maybe a specific environment to this particular publisher, maybe a certain situation, certain policy for that publisher. It doesn't mean it becomes an industry standard. So, I think, at least Spring and Nature, I've never heard of TNF, stopping certain negotiations. So I think really each publisher, at least again, Spring and Nature, we are keen on making things happen. And I think that also speaks volume in terms of how much could be done. Yeah, if you have the right attitude, if you have the right, frame mindset in terms of making change happen and try to help, I think that's the major thing. But also I want to emphasize on the complexity of these things. So I think earlier we mentioned, again, read and publish, and it has to make sense, and there has to be some savings. Absolutely. I think that's the overall goal, let's say, for the next few years to come. Once we are all in a fully open access world, which I think it will happen inevitably. By when, I don't know. How would it look like? Not clear yet. But at the same time, for example, and that's what I say, it really depends on what do you subscribe to, how much you publish, and which journals will remain in your read part, because we also contractually obliged to give certain societies certain royalties and so on and so forth. So there is so much complex environment which we have to navigate. So again, the question of, is it worthwhile my investment? That's a decision could be made between the publisher and the university based on the actual situation. But I just wanted to highlight the fact there are so many costs involved for the business to make it work. So it's not just like I had read before and now I can move all this to publishing. Well, once you start moving this to publishing, I can't publish everything for free. There is cost for it. At the same time, I still need to retain certain read fee for certain societies or journals or cost involved. And that's where we have to work with each university or consortia to make sure it makes sense to both parties, as Chris said.
Thank you. So we're going to wrap up shortly. And what I'd like to do is effectively have a red team, blue team, sort of quick summation. So Carolyn and Chris, each of you has, looking at the time, 1 minute to, or less. You can take less, but no more. So we have time to do the survey at the end, because I'd like to do the survey at the end again and see if the barometer's shifted, if anyone's changed their minds. So each of you has 1 minute to make the case. Carolyn, if you make the case for transformative agreements, and Chris, if you maybe weigh in on the disadvantages, as both of your natural bents are. So Carolyn, you're unmuted, so over to you first.
Okay, thank you, Emily. I think for us at Taylor & Francis, we see transformative agreements or read and publish as a really effective mechanism to open up research at scale for a given community. I don't think it's the sole answer or the sole business model that is going to enable a global transition of all journal portfolios, but we have seen that where they are invested in and where we do reach these agreements, we do see a significant uptake of open access. So Sweden, as an example, about 90% of the research is now open versus 15% pre-agreement with Taylor & Francis. As I said earlier, we've also seen it as a really effective mechanism, and we've talked about equity quite a lot here, in terms of opening up publishing options for HSS researchers. So 75% of our OA content under a read and publish is in HSS, where we know they wouldn't otherwise have had funding if it were under an APC model. So I think in summary, that's kind of how we see it, is that it's one route to open where we can partner with either institutions or consortia to affect that change within that community, and put that option for researchers at no cost to themselves.
Thank you, Carolyn. And Chris, over to you. Your 1 minute starts now. Yeah,
actually, I'll start by saying I actually agree that it's not a path to a global transformation for fully open scholarship world. It's a path for individual institutions, and I'll end with an analogy. Like for individual if our goal is to, for example, land on the moon, if our goal is to get to the moon, individual institutions building really high ladders doesn't get the world closer to the moon. We have to build something new, and a new way of, yes, paying for the cost of publishing. I understand. I also have a responsibility for the MIT Press, so I understand very well that there is a cost to publishing quality scholarship, but we have to figure out a different way of sustaining those costs at a reasonable level while also allowing the full breadth of scholarship and scholars to participate in the scholarly conversation. So we've got to build a new spaceship so that we can get all the way to the moon, because it's these individual deals are not good for the system. And then also, one last point, it's not just MIT. Again, Aaron mentioned the University of Connecticut also ran the numbers, and it turns out many of them are not good deals financially for an institution. You might get a better deal by paying per article, both to read and to publish. And so I encourage the librarians to really, really analyze the offers that that are on the table for you, and make sure that they make sense compared to a variety of alternatives, one of which is to simply pay per article for both reading and publishing.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. So if all of you could get out your mobile phones again, or use your laptops. Mira, if you could skip to the next slide, please. So once again, I'd like to re-ask the question we asked before. Would you encourage your institution to opt for a transformative agreement? And I want to see if the statistics are changing. So we've got the initial answers in the chat. So out of the total, 26 people. Would have liked more of you to respond. If you felt shy before, please do respond now that you've learned a little more and listened to everyone's opinions. We'd really like to see the numbers. But of those, 50% said yes, definitely. They would definitely be pro transformative agreements. Only one said definitely not. 8, so 31% said, don't really know. And 15% said they didn't know what a transformative agreement was. So once again, if you either scan the QR code here or go to www.menti.com and type in the reference code that's highlighted in yellow, we would very much like to see your answers. We'll leave that up for a couple more seconds, but the link to make your life easier is also available in the chat if you just want to click directly on that link. It'll take you straight to the question. Mira, if you could go to the next slide and we can start to see some of the results. If you log into Menti for us. As I said, please do all try and fill this in because we are genuinely, and I'm sure our panelists are also really keen to see if they've influenced you in any way over the last hour and a half. Interesting. So far, everyone is still pro-transformative agreements. The firm number one, I'd be interested to see if it's the same person who's a definitive no. Two maybes, less zeros, but less people are logging in. So all of you, please do, if you're still with us, please do try and log in quickly. It'll only take you 10 seconds to do it, but we really would love to see the answers. You don't even have to get your phone out. You can just click on the link in the chat and copy and paste that code in. So it is nice and easy for you if you would like to answer. And in the meantime, we'll just leave that running. I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much to our panelists. I really appreciate the talk, and I'm sure all of our delegates have as well. It's been incredibly interesting and really nice to have you all. I kind of wish we'd scheduled it for a whole day. I actually feel an hour and a half has been far too short. We could really have done with another couple of hours to really dive in because there's been so many great topics raised and issues touched on that we haven't really had a chance to dive into, largely because I've had my eye on the clock, and I know particularly for those of you here in the Middle East, a lot of you probably want to go home. Yeah. Thank you, Mira, for changing the slide. So before you all go, oh no, if you can go back one. Before you all go, just a reminder for those of you who might not be on our mailing list, might not be aware, in 2 weeks' time, we are having our flagship event, the annual forum, the third annual forum. It will be taking place from the 21st to the 24th of October. It is a hybrid event, so in person, it'll be taking place in Doha, because we're holding it this year in partnership with the Qatar National Library, but it will also be completely online. We've got 68 speakers in 23 sessions, 12 networking events for those of you who are joining us on in person, and the thematic areas we're covering are really interesting, and the whole theme itself is around transforming knowledge into action. So we are trying to be very proactive. It's a very exciting program of panelists that we are genuinely very excited about. So I hope some of you will join us. The registration link is there, but also you can find us online if you just type in Forum for Open Research. The link will pop up. And before you leave, if we could skip to the next slide. As many of you know, our regulars, we do try, and we were holding an event, a free event like this every single month. We are currently planning our 2025 program of events. So if there is something you would like us to a topic you'd like us to cover or a type of event you would like to suggest, please do take the time to fill in this survey, because that means you can leave some lovely testimonials for our amazing speakers, and I'm sure they would really appreciate that because everyone likes to know that people like to hear you speak, but also more importantly, if you give us some tips and guidance before we finalise the 2025 programme, we can endeavour to incorporate as much as possible into that scheduling. So we run workshops, we run webinars, and we run these larger multi-panelist symposia. So please do take the time. It literally takes 3 minutes, if that, for you to fill it in. And I'm sure both I and our panelists would hugely appreciate any feedback you could give us, both suggestions for improvements for this panel, but also suggestions for future topics. And as I mentioned, say nice things about our panelists because they've been amazing. So yeah, we're pretty much on time. So thank you again so much for joining us, all of you. And as I said, in particular, a special thanks to Chris and Erin for getting up incredibly early. We really appreciate it. And for Carolyn and Esther for joining us, and for Amina and Abdullah here in the UAE for staying late at work. So thank you. I'm the only one who can clap because I'm just here, just me, but thank you very much. We'll leave all of this
Thanks,
up
everyone.
for a little bit longer so that you can have the QR code, but lovely panelists, if you wish to leave, thank you again. And we'll be sending the report shortly. And for those of you who are still with us online, we will be providing the full video with an Arabic transcript for you to listen to again if you wish, and to circulate to anyone you think will find it interesting. So yes.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And
Thanks,
genuinely,
Emily.
thank you, really, really appreciate it. And Amina and Abdullah, I will see you in person in a couple of weeks in Doha.
Sure. Bye-bye.
Joy, Mira, do you need anything from me now?
No, no, we're good.
All done? Thanks,
All
guys. Yeah, I think it went well. I hope it went well. So yeah, ping me over the recording as and when you have it, and Joy, I will see you in the office tomorrow, I think.
See you, yeah.
Bye, guys. And once again, thank you to all of our delegates who are still here. We really appreciated you guys being there, and I hope you found it very interesting.